Hey everybody, Dr. G here. I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist as well as a body language expert, but today we're not going to be talking so much about body language. Today we're going to be talking about the diagnosis of Jeffrey Dahmer. Before we get started with this, a couple of quick things. One, I wanted to make sure you know this is not a formal psychological evaluation of any kind. These are just my opinions. In addition to that, I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, let's go. If you're watching this, you likely already know that Jeffrey Dahmer is one of America's most notorious serial killers with at least 17 victims. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be watching some clips of Jeffrey Dahmer, and we're going to be talking about diagnosis. The reason we're going to address this today is I've had so many questions about what diagnosis he actually has. We're going to talk about the diagnoses he received, we're going to talk about what's wrong with some of those diagnoses, and we're going to talk about what is more likely as far as his actual diagnosis. And just to be clear, because he is a public figure and he is deceased, we are allowed to talk about diagnosis, we're allowed to talk about and speculate on these things. All right, let's just jump right in.
Process, it doesn't happen overnight. When you depersonalize another person and view them as just an object for pleasure instead of a living, breathing human being, it seems to make it easier.
So Jeffrey Dahmer just described very accurately how certain personality disorders see other people. They don't see them as people, they see them as objects. And I want to be very, very literal about that. They see them as objects. They do not see them as human beings. The connection to human beings is gone for them. So let's talk a bit about what personality disorders are. Your average person is made up of a cluster of traits, some healthy, some not healthy, but they are flexible. Those traits can change. These people are capable of learning. They can learn from experiences, change their behavior, and their behavior can adapt. Now, someone with a personality disorder, they're going to have one really dominant trait, they're going to have one really dominant deficiency, and they have no capacity to truly learn, to change, to make their lives better. So they lose the ability to look inward. We're going to watch a little bit more, and then we're going to talk about the personality disorders that he was diagnosed with.
I always knew that it was wrong, but after the first...
You saw that chin tuck. I can't help but talk a little bit about body language, but that's a defensive posture to protect ourselves there. He is feeling defensive answering this question.
Knew that it was wrong, but after the first killing was not planned. I had fantasies about picking up a hitchhiker and taking him back to the house and having complete control and dominance.
You notice the way that he's looking at the interviewer as he says this. The idea of control and dominance, understanding the intensity of that is so far beyond what any of us can experience or understand. Truly, the amount of control that someone like Jeffrey Dahmer would desire is beyond our comprehension. So let's talk a bit about some of the personality disorders he was diagnosed with. And this was back in the 90s. We understand personality disorders a lot better now. They have gotten a lot more refined. So I'm going to be challenging some of these diagnoses because we understand them better now. I'm sure at the time it probably seemed correct, but I think that they're wrong about some of these. So he was diagnosed with two personality disorders, schizotypal personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. Now, I talked about how each personality disorder has one primary trait and one primary deficiency. So even though this wasn't one of the diagnoses he was giving, I'm going to take a second to talk about narcissistic personality disorder because it's one people understand fairly well. It's pretty straightforward. So the primary trait of a narcissist is grandiosity. They have to be the most important person, not only in the room, but the most important person, period. The world is there to cater to them. And what they're deficient in is equality. No one's allowed to be equal to them. So they're chronically grandiose and they see no one as equal. So that's what basically encapsulates narcissistic personality disorder. Now, he was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Now, the primary trait of someone with borderline personality disorder is that they are unstable. And the primary deficiency is proportionality. Nothing is proportional. So they're chronically emotionally unstable. Their most stable trait is that they deal with instability. And their primary deficiency is proportionality. So an example of proportionality, so you understand what that means, would be that someone doesn't call you back. And so all of a sudden, you become unstable, you get furious, you want to just ruin their life because this person didn't call you back, and you make all of this meaning from that or something to that effect. It's something that is totally disproportionate to the situation. So that is their biggest deficiency. Now, when we look at Jeffrey Dahmer, did he do extreme things? Obviously he did, but not based around this. I do not think that he was unstable in that sense. If anything, he was underfunctioning in a lot of areas. He was very stable. He was mentally ill, but stable in a sense. And proportionality, that doesn't seem to make much sense either. So my opinion is borderline personality disorder is not right. Let's keep watching, then we're going to talk about schizotypal.
Frequenting the gay bars. And then one time I brought this young man back to the hotel room, the Ambassador Hotel. Was just planning on drugging him and spending the night with him. Had no intention of hurting him. When I woke...
Now, that's interesting when he said I had no intention of hurting him. Obviously, if you drug someone, that is hurting them. But to his point, he wasn't planning on killing this person. And his body language actually suggests that that's true. But the one thing to understand about Jeffrey Dahmer, as he talks about this, is that when he appears uncomfortable, when there's discomfort coming out, it has more to do with losing control and talking about this. He does not feel any guilt about what he did. I can assure you of that. But to go on to schizotypal personality disorder, let's talk a bit about what that is, because that's not one that most people have heard of. So someone who's schizotypal is going to be someone who's very peculiar. Their primary trait is that they are eccentric. So in other words, they're very odd. Now, he is peculiar, but not quite in that way. The primary deficiency of someone with schizotypal is that they are not conforming. They do not conform. So when I think of schizotypal, I think of someone that dresses very eccentrically. Maybe they wear bright colors, sort of peculiar hats, might do their hair in strange ways. They're going to come across as very, very odd. Jeffrey Dahmer is peculiar because he's unsettling, but he's not strange. He is conforming. If anything, he's very conforming. The way that he dressed historically, all of those things conformed very much to norms. So in that sense, schizotypal also doesn't make sense. Now, people that are schizotypal tend to have odd thoughts. They tend to make weird connections with things. So it could be because his thought processes were strange. They felt, well, that maybe that he's schizotypal because he made all of these weird connections between wanting to keep people as zombies and all of this, which once again, yes, very strange, but not it doesn't have the right quality that something like schizotypal does. It just doesn't quite work there, because the most important parts of schizotypal he doesn't meet. So borderline doesn't really make sense. Schizotypal doesn't make sense.
Were you upset?
No, at the time it was almost addictive. It was almost a surge of energy. I wouldn't have to worry about any of their needs or anything. I just had complete control of the situation.
So hearing him talk about these addictions, almost the excitement from that, BTK speaks very similarly when it comes to when he talks about his victims and his plans and all of this. He had fantasies that he was very excited by. And this is the one area that people like him, people like BTK, can actually feel something. Now, as far as the way that he presents, I've heard many people say, well, he's insightful. He knows what he did. All of this. He actually is on the spectrum. There's not a single thing that makes me think that Jeffrey Dahmer is on the autism spectrum, despite many people speculating that. Because I think that the reason people do is because he can be quiet. He can be a little bit flat. There are aspects of how he presents where I get people go, okay, maybe that's something that's similar to the autism spectrum because maybe they're familiar with it. But it couldn't be further from the truth. I've heard so many people identify so many psychopaths, serial killers, murderers, and say, oh yeah, they're on the spectrum. People are confusing people being psychopaths with people being autistic. It could not be more different, other than they both can present in kind of a flat way. People that are on the spectrum do not have great social skills because they don't understand the rules very well, but they want to. They don't want to hurt people. People that are psychopaths don't mind hurting people. It's nothing to them. Someone that is on the spectrum may be rude because they don't understand not to be rude. Someone that's a psychopath enjoys the suffering of others. They might look the same on the outside superficially in certain situations, but they could not be more different. There's nothing about Jeffrey Dahmer that makes me think that he's on the autism spectrum. No stimming. His motivations, for example, he was just talking about control. People on the spectrum typically want social acceptance. They really want it, but may struggle with it. They might not be good at it. Now, in this day and age, we've gotten a lot better at identifying it. We've created a lot more situations where people on the spectrum have a lot more social opportunities, and we're able to talk about it. But that's very, very different than the way he presents. Jeffrey Dahmer presents as someone who wants and needs absolute control, and he says that. And that is very, very characteristic of a psychopath. But anyway, let's watch a little bit more. Then we're going to talk more about psychopathy.
Why did you photograph them?
It was my way of remembering.
You keep hearing those sighs. He just really hates having to spill all of this out, to lose this much control in an interview.
Their appearance, their physical beauty. I also wanted to keep if I couldn't keep them there with me whole, at least I felt that I could keep their skeletons. And I even went so far as planning on setting up an altar with the 10 different skulls and skeletons.
So somebody that's on the spectrum might struggle to know if they're saying something that's bothersome to other people. Jeffrey Dahmer knows exactly how disturbing what he's saying is. He's looking at the interviewer after everything he says. He knows precisely what he's doing. And one of the reasons that people have said, oh, he's not a psychopath, is because he'll express remorse. People think that he has more insight than your average psychopath. But when we look at psychopaths, they're not that uncommon. Actually, they're fairly common. Now, psychopaths like him are very uncommon. Not 1 in a million, not 1 in a billion. We're talking like 1 in 6 billion. People like him do not come around very often. He is an exceptionally strange psychopath. So when it comes to trying to figure him out, he's not going to fit as cleanly into some of these categories as other people. That being said, he is 100% a psychopath. He checks every single box. Just because he can express regret does not mean he actually feels it. There's a lot of evidence to suggest he actually does not feel any of these things. So you have to understand, when he talks about this, when he is a little bit insightful or provides a little bit of information about it, that doesn't mean he's not a psychopath. It just means that he is expressing certain feelings. It doesn't mean he actually feels them. People like this love to manipulate. They love to be in control. So if they can control other people by saying, hey, I feel this way, and convince them of that, that's a win for them. It's all about manipulation. Jeffrey Dahmer is not a good guy. He's not an insightful guy. He's not somebody that I genuinely believe has any regret. So if you question whether or not he's a psychopath, understand he is most definitely a psychopath. Now, as far as personality disorders goes, that falls under the purview of antisocial personality disorder. The primary trait of someone with antisocial personality disorder is exploitation. They don't mind exploiting people at all. In fact, they love it. They love to exploit others. And what they lack is any honor whatsoever. So someone who truly has antisocial personality disorder, extremely high on exploitation, extremely low on honor.
The 10 different skulls and skeletons.
And what was the purpose of the altar going to be?
As a sort of memorial. A point where I could, I don't know. It's so bizarre and strange, it's hard to describe.
So saying something like that, it's so bizarre and strange, it's hard to describe. Those are the things that make people say, well, maybe he's not a psychopath, maybe it's something else. But people like Ted Bundy, for example, he was able to blame all of his behaviors on all sorts of things and say, oh yeah, he's remorseful, and basically he'd found religion and all this stuff. All of those are lies. Those are ways to maintain and appear in control, just like Jeffrey Dahmer. I do not think that he actually found religion later on in his life, but that was a way to say, I'm in control and there's nothing you can do about it. I'm forgiven and there's nothing you can do about it. So to me, this is just more manipulation, more exploitation. But as he talks about this, the idea that people are objects goes back to that. When someone has antisocial personality, narcissistic personality, I cannot overstate how literal I am being when I say that they see people as objects. And when we talk about objectifying people, it's a very common term, but I want people to be very literal about that when we're talking about narcissists, when we're talking about psychopaths. And also with personality disorders, they come in different clusters. This is part of cluster B: antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality, and histrionic personality. Now, typically, people that are in cluster B have aspects of all of those. One of them will be dominant, but there's components of all 4 of those in different order. So just because he has antisocial personality doesn't mean he's not also high on narcissism. Maybe he has some borderline personality traits, but I really don't think he has borderline personality. Let's keep going.
A place where I could collect my thoughts and feed my obsession.
When the bodies were still in your apartment, there was no time when you would see them and say, this is grotesque. What have I done?
There were times, but the compulsive obsession with doing what I was doing overpowered any feelings of revulsion.
So he talks about compulsive obsession. Another diagnosis people have talked about was OCD. Now, OCD is an anxiety disorder. It's rooted in the idea that I feel so anxious about something that I can't stop thinking about it, so I have to do a compulsion to get rid of this anxiety. He talks about being obsessive probably because it was exciting and he just had a hard time getting it off his mind. These are not special interests related to autism. I feel very strongly about that. I also think that OCD isn't quite right because, like I said, OCD is an anxiety disorder and he's not an anxious person. So I think that he had the obsessive part of these things, but the compulsive part, not so much.
Was there any kind of ritual you went through?
I'd go to the nightclubs, drink, watch the striptease shows, and if I didn't meet anyone at the bars, I'd go to the bath clubs and meet someone there, offer them money, and we'd go back to the apartment, have a few drinks. I'd have the...
So the having a few drinks part is also important. He did have an alcohol dependence issue. He was a severe alcoholic, from my understanding, although that's somewhat less complex, so we're not going to get as much into that. But substance abuse, alcoholism, also not uncommon with antisocial personality disorder.
Having these obsessive thoughts when I was about 15 and 16, and they got worse and worse.
What were your fantasies about?
They were sexual fantasies of control, power, complete dominance. They became reality.
Was there pleasure in that fantasy?
There was excitement, fear, pleasure, all mixed together.
So it's times like this that make people question, does he have more insight than he should? Is he not a psychopath because he's willing to talk about these things? But don't be fooled. This is part of his manipulation. He's been caught. He needs control. And the best way that he can maintain control is to talk about this. For whatever reason, that to him was the way to maintain control. You see, there's some discomfort with that. He struggles a bit with that. But this is still just a psychopath manipulation, just like everything else that serial killers do. Do not be fooled by the fact that at times he seems reserved or calm or something to that effect. This is absolutely someone who mercilessly did things that are so inhuman. I'm not even talking about him on this video. The things he did that were so subhuman and so awful, the idea that anybody could truly consider him anything other than a psychopath at this point, with everything that we know about these disorders, I can't see it any other way. But when we talk about what diagnoses he did have versus what he didn't, antisocial personality disorder, 100%. Is he a psychopath? That's not a technical diagnosis. That's more a cluster of behaviors. But yes, he was absolutely a stereotypical psychopath, other than the fact that he talked about his crimes and expressed verbally regret, although I doubt he actually felt anything. Borderline personality doesn't fit. Schizotypal personality doesn't fit. It's also been suggested he had some kind of psychotic disorder, which means that you're detached from reality. But the way that he talks, the way that he is, doesn't seem like most thought disorders that you would see. So even that doesn't seem very likely. OCD seems unlikely because that's an anxiety disorder, and he's really not that anxious. His obsessions and compulsions seemed more consistent with that of a typical serial killer than somebody with an anxiety disorder. So what it really boils down to is antisocial personality disorder, alcohol dependence. The only other diagnosis that would really make any sense would be some type of paraphilia, which is sexualizing things that you shouldn't sexualize. He had all sorts of sexual issues. So we'll go ahead and wrap things up here. Jeffrey Dahmer is in fact much more straightforward diagnostically than he seems, but he's so manipulative, he's so good at it, that he has fooled people into questioning whether or not he's anything more than just a run-of-the-mill psychopath. And while he engaged in behaviors that are more depraved than even some of the worst psychopaths, that really still is what it boils down to, is this man is a psychopath with alcohol dependence and paraphilias. If you like this different format rather than me just talking about body language, please let me know. And if there's anything else you want me to analyze, I'd also like to hear about that. Last thing before we get finished up is I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, thanks for watching.